Hello and welcome today to our template code webinar. We're going to talk about formatting and conditions in custom templates. My name is Elizabeth Kohl. I'm Director of Communications and User Experience at TaxCycle. And for some reason, I wear the hat of answering template questions from staff and when people call into support. So I'm here today to try and surface some of those questions to you and be able to show you what I keep showing other people. So today we are going to cover all of this, hopefully. We're going to do a tour of the template editor, just so you know where you are when I'm moving around the screens. We're going to do a description of all the different types of templates and why you want to use one type versus another. We're going to create an entirely new template from scratch, and this is to show you how I go about it when I have to create a new template. And within that process, I'll show you how to copy field codes, how to format field codes, dates, and numbers, how to create conditions, and then we'll talk a little bit about what's called the client context. And in this webinar, it's really about making your code simpler and easier to read. In future webinars, we will show you how to use that to change what data displays. And lastly, we'll look at relevant and used conditions to control when your template appears in the tax return. The data in this presentation is entirely fictional and used solely for illustrative purposes. So don't worry if you see names or filing information, that's all been made up. All right, we're going to get on with our demo over here. So we're going to get started, and I'm going to show you first how to open the template editor if you haven't discovered that. If you're on your start screen, it's on the left-hand side. There's a link for the template editor in the blue bar. However, my preferred way of opening the template editor is actually to find a template in a file, and then open that. And then if you right-click on that, it will open that template in the template editor. And the reason I do it this way is that you always need a file open to test what you're creating. So it's always good to open the file first, and then you know you have the right year and module, and then you can start playing around with templates. So that's the reason why I generally open the file first and then jump into the template editor. Okay, so this is our template editor. It opens in a separate window. On the left-hand side, you have a list of all the templates. One thing we added this year is the ability to filter that list. If you've been with us for a while, you know that we have a lot of templates. Like if I clear all these filters, you will see, well, even if I don't clear all of them, if I just do 1 year, or 2 years, there's tons of templates in here. And we actually show the English and the French templates. If you're working in English, the English ones will appear at the top, nested under the module year, and the French underneath. If you work in the French interface, that will be reversed. But you can control that here and show only the English and only certain types of templates if you'd like. Over on the right-hand side, you have two columns. The first one is the code. So this is where all the fancy stuff happens and that we're going to work on today. The second column is a preview that takes the data from that open tax return and runs it through the code and displays the data from the tax return. If you're finding you're working on a smaller screen or you want to change this view, you can change the view for the preview at the top. So you could shift the preview down the bottom if that helps you to just see a little less code and be able to scroll through either pane separately. You could even hide the preview if you're trying to work on something in detail. I generally work side by side. And another way to save a bit of space is to collapse the sidebar like you can in TaxCycle. So you can always do that. And you can collapse up the ribbon too. Then you get quite a bit of room on a fairly small screen if you're ever stuck. Now on the side, there actually are 3 tabs on the sidebar. We are on the templates tab, as I said, that lists all the templates. There's also a properties tab, and we're going to go into this in detail to help create our new template. And then there's the preview tab. And this is where you select which taxpayer's information appears in the preview. So right now I've got Martin selected in that return that I have open. And these are the other taxpayers in that return. So you have Vanessa, and you notice as soon as I click on Vanessa, the right-hand pane, her details show up. So when you're testing a template, sometimes it can be good to have a file with a couple of different scenarios, especially things like in the client letter where you might have someone who has filed or not filed, has a refund, doesn't have a refund. You can also open up several different files on the left-hand side and know which taxpayers you want to test them against. All right. Let's take a quick look at types of templates. So I mentioned them here when we did a filter in the filter dropdown. However, every template has a type and they get set on the properties sidebar. So these types, there's actually 5 different possibilities. And I want to walk you through them because choosing the right type makes a difference to how the template behaves over in TaxCycle. The letter template is kind of your default template. You can use it for all kinds of things. It will always show in the sidebar in TaxCycle, usually by default in the correspondence section, but you can actually choose where you want it to appear and which category you want it to appear in the return as well here in the sidebar in properties. So if you want it to show up as somewhere different, it can. We will do that later as well. Letter templates are pretty straightforward. Some of them actually allow for digital signatures. I'm not going to cover that today, which is really helpful. You can also send letter templates by email through your desktop email client. So say you have Outlook installed on your desktop. If you hit this little envelope icon next to the name, it will open up a new message and put the information in the message for you to click send. Now, it doesn't work with Gmail and web-based products. However, just wanted to point that out because there's still a significant number of people using Outlook, and that might be handy for you. So the reason I point out the email in that way is because there is another template called email in the template type, and this is has an entirely different purpose. Yes, it's still for sending email, but you want to think about it as like your cover email, or the email that you write to which you're going to attach something. And that's the one that appears in the list when you go to print something. So if I decide to go to the sidebar and I'm going to go to my client copy and I'm going to edit the settings, if I change this to a PDF, I can choose different ways to email the PDF of the return. I can choose to email it with my email client. I can choose tax folder or DocuSign if I'm going for a signature. And if I select tax folder, I then get this, or one of those options from that field, I again get this message field. And then those are all the email type templates. So when I get through this, it's kind of like if you've used tax folder, this is the email that will go to the client, and there will be a link in it for them to go and sign whatever it is in tax folder. And if it was just a plain email, it would be attached to the email. I just want you to note that that's all those email type templates appear in this list. You will never see them in the sidebar. And when we get back over to this list, we have a couple more to cover. I like talking about the snippet templates. So snippet templates are kind of building blocks for using in other templates. So a really good example of this is at the top of this client letter, you can see, if I can do this well, I always hit the wrong thing. Sorry about that. Trying to use my keyboard to zoom. It's always there we go. You can see this little piece of code that has, 2 curly brackets, a greater than, and then it has the name of the template and 2 curly brackets at the end. Put that together, and that is the code for inserting a snippet. So if I look in here, it's looking at the C salutation snippet, which is this snippet, which is used to insert the client's address and the salutation of the letter. So the neat thing about this is we could create this snippet, and if you wanted to change this snippet, you could clone it and do that, and then it would update across all the letters that use the same snippet. So it's one way to build kind of a combo letter based on snippets. I've always dreamed of turning this client letter into a letter of snippets. We haven't quite got there yet. There's some kinks to iron out in that regard. But I wanted to point out that this is how this works. Also, the letterhead snippet works that way. And if you take some time and, I believe, watch the Getting Started with Templates webinar, you will also get a chance to learn how to edit this for yourself. But it's the same concept. You edit one file and it goes into all the letters. And those types of templates are called snippets. And I'm going to go back to where I can see my properties in the sidebar. The other two template types are labels and invoices. Both of these do appear in the sidebar of TaxCycle. The labels, you can see here we have a generic mailing label. They also come in handy if you want to print the labels. So print a series of labels on a sheet of labels, for example, particularly in slips modules, that can be handy. You can select the type of label you want to use at the top if you're in a slips module. And then the last type of template, of course, is the invoice templates. And the reason why they're a separate type is invoice templates have a relationship with two things in TaxCycle. They relate to the billing worksheet and the data on the billing worksheet. So, and the invoice number here and whether it's been completed. And this is all because they relate to the billing workflow items and status in the sidebar. So generally people take an invoice template and duplicate it and then make their changes to it. It's pretty rare that someone starts from scratch on those. They are super complex too. If you start digging around in them, it's easy to break things, but you can add and change stuff if you need to. I'm going to start a new template and just show you a little bit about template files. So if I start a blank new template in here, I need to choose what year and module it applies to. In this case, I'm working in 2024, but I could, in theory, if it's a fairly generic template, make it apply to 2025 as well. You could theoretically, with letterheads, make a template apply across all of the modules. A couple of years ago, we did a bunch of work to standardize the field codes on the engagement worksheet across all modules to make this possible. So in general, it should work, especially for letterhead. However, when you get into more taxpayer details, or of course individual forms, they differ across modules. So it's pretty hard to share a T1 and a T2 template if you're going to be looking at data within the tax return. But things like a letterhead, you absolutely can. So I'm going to click OK, and of course that opens a blank template. And I'm going to give this template a name. I just got to remember the name I wanted to choose for it. I'm just going to call it Business Auth Reminder. So what we're going to do in a little bit is create a letter that you can use that will remind people to authorize you as a business representative. And so before I save this template, I do need to give it a name so that it saves as a name logically, and that's why I'm putting this in here. The name also is what will appear in the sidebar, in the prepare sidebar. And then I'm just going to give it a description on a reminder to authorize business representative. And when I hit save, TaxCycle is going to use that name and the versions and years to create the file name, which is helpful. It's also, and it's going to store it in whatever my template location is set in options. So I'm going to save it, and then I'm going to go into options just really quickly to show you this. When I go into options, there's a template files page here. This is under the general TaxCycle options. And this is what decides where these template files go. So template files have a long extension on them. I think it's TaxCycle templates, .TaxCycle templates, but they're underneath, they're just HTML files with a lot of inline CSS in them. So you could technically throw an HTML file in this template folder, and it should show up in the template editor if it has the metadata that we're setting in the properties section as well. But what I wanted to point out here is if you've been with TaxCycle for a while, it is entirely possible that you're storing your templates locally or in a default location on your computer. We have been moving people to storing them in what we call options profiles, which are actually a zip file with all the other options. And why this is important is that when you decide to share your options with someone else in the office, having them in an options profile makes that really, really easy. Rather than setting those template files on a server in a folder, you can set the options profile there and have everybody point to it. This will also come in handy as we evolve the way TaxCycle works with cloud storage, as we will use this as the basis for sharing options in the cloud. So if your options aren't in an options profile, like mine aren't here, you can see this little link up here that says copy to webinar options, which is the name of my options profile. And then it will put them all into that options profile. So if you haven't done this yet and you've been with us for a while, I highly recommend taking the time to do that and getting everything in that options profile. I'm going to cancel out of here, though. I have my reasons, by the way, and you noticed I stored them on my C drive. I have my reasons for doing that when I'm doing development. So it makes it slightly easy for me to drag and drop things in and out. So I'm not going to save my change necessarily. Okay, we're going to take a little more of a look at the sidebar here, the properties sidebar, before we get into the meat of the content of this. So we've given it a name, we've given it a description. We're going to set it to English. You can set it to French if you're working in English, and then it'll work in the French side and not in the English side, just so you know. The module we've already set. By default, any new template has this saying it doesn't replace anything. What I mean by that is you can technically create a template and then have it replace one of our existing built-in templates, so the client letter, any kind of template. And if you have cloned it and it says it replaces the client letter, you can hit that little make unique link that's grayed out, and it will give it a new GUID behind the scenes and make sure that it shows up separately in your sidebar. We've covered the type category. Since this is an authorization template, why don't we put it in filing and authorization? I'm just going to show you that if you change that category and we go back to my TaxCycle, there it is. There's my business auth reminder with your letter content goes here. So you can really control where things go. The subject here is, if you are choosing to email this, you can put an email subject in there, and that's what'll show up when it opens in Outlook, or when it gets, yes, it will open in Outlook. If it's an email type, of course, it'll get inserted in the email in a different way when you go to tax folder. If you're printing this, you can set some margins. These values are in inches. We have used and true conditions. I'm going to come back to that, but what you need to remember is a relevant condition is when it shows you determine whether it's going to show up in the list in the sidebar for a particular taxpayer. And a used condition is when it's going to show as used, so it has the lines in it, or if it's considered used, you can include it in a print set or not include it in a print set. So playing around with these conditions is something that we get a lot of questions about, sometimes to create something a little more complex. I'll add one today to give you a sense how they work. They're not that difficult. You just have to figure out what you want to key it off of. So, and then finally, signature ID. That relates to forms that, like engagement letters, where you would potentially request a signature. And it's there you can see it's kind of grayed out because this one hasn't been cloned. It's there again to manage that workflow around it. So has it been sent for signature? Did it come back for signature? So that TaxCycle can track it. So I think we have a help topic a little bit about what IDs are there and what you can do with things. All right, let's get to the fun part. Now I've lost my letter. There it is. One of the things I do, I always write my letter out in Word first, or whatever word processor you might find useful. And I do this because I want to have a vision in my mind about what it should look like. So here's my little letter. It's got a subject to it. Oh, maybe I'll grab the subject and stick it in that field. In TaxCycle, I can just copy and paste it over. There we go. I'm going to keep saving as I go. So if you write it out ahead of time, you have a really strong idea of what it should look like. Or if you've used a template before, this is one way, like in some other program, this is one way that you can quickly get it prepared. So I'm going to go so far as copying and pasting this straight into the template editor, because it's going to save me a ton of time today. And you can see if I go on my side-by-side here, it looks great. You know, done. We don't have any work to do. But if I go and I test, I look, I actually should be seeing Vanessa's name instead of Martin's, right? So what I need to do now is populate this lovely template with the field codes that will pull in the information from the return. So we're going to work through it from top to bottom. So first off, what do I need? I need his name. So I can go straight over to the info worksheet in TaxCycle, grab that first name field. So when you're in here, you have two ways of getting to those field codes. My favorite is just click in the field that you want, and then down at the bottom left here on the blue bar, there's a link. And if you click once on the link, that puts it on your, on your clipboard. Alternatively, if you're a big fan of right-click, as some people are, you can right-click and choose copy field code with brackets. And there's actually Control-Alt-G to grab this as well. Be careful. You want the curly one with the curly brackets for when you're working in template code. There's another one here for just copying the field code without the curly brackets, but then you're going to have to add them to be able to use them in template code. So just remember that. So we're going to take that over. We're going to remove Martin's name from here, and we're going to insert that field code. And lo and behold, it changes to Vanessa. So we're getting there. That's the very, very basic thing you need to know to add content to a template. If you can copy a field code and paste it in, you're on your way. So let's read this letter as we go along. I might actually enlarge it just a little bit so I can read it a little more closely. Thank you for signing the form authorizing our firm as a new representative for your business account with the Canada Revenue Agency for 2024. So what if I want this to apply to 2025, right? Because I set this for 2 years. We have something magical called constants. And the constants are made to take the information from the tax return, like the year, handily. And you're going to see me refer to these pages a lot. There is a section on the website where we've been, as much as possible, we've been trying to detail some of this information around template codes. So it's in the resources help topics section. And then if you go all the way down the bottom here, there's two sections in the help here. There's templates, which talks more about built-in templates and how to use the templates and roll your templates forward and some of the customizations you can make. But the template code section it focuses just on the code within the templates. And if you look in here, we have a page all about dates. And this is where I go when someone asks me, what's the code for blah, blah, blah. And the date constant is particularly helpful up here. You've got date constants. You can have it put in today's date. So if you wanted to say, always make sure this letter references the date that it appears on screen or was printed, you can use that. We're going to want to use current taxation year. So I'm going to copy that. But I'm going to do something a little different. Instead of going straight into my template editor, I don't want to pick up any of the formatting. Remember how earlier I said that the templates are basically HTML behind the scenes? Well, a web page is basically HTML and CSS behind the scenes too. And Windows is smart enough that if I copy from this window, it's going to take that formatting, that green text, and put it into my template. Well, I'm going to do it just so you can see it happen, because if this happens to you, you will remember. And there's a much easier way to avoid this. Isn't that pretty? Isn't that tiny? So rather than pasting that piece in there, I'm going to open a notepad or any kind of text editor. I'm going to just paste it to strip the formatting in here, and then I'm going to copy it again. And then I'm going to take it into my template. And then that's nice. Then it'll pick up the formatting of the paragraph that's already there. So that's kind of one rule to think about with templates, is that behind the scenes, there's an awful lot of code being generated. So one of the things to consider, say I wanted to bold this year, I can come along and I can bold it. Well, if I just click part of that content and I hit bold, what happens? Look at that on the right-hand side. I actually lost the number. And I can tell you why that is. The long technical explanation is that behind the scenes, it inserts a span in between those two sets of curly braces. And when it does that, it stops it from reading that as one field code and kind of divides it up and makes it illegible to the template editor. So if you're going to apply formatting, like the things that are at the top of the window here with paragraphs or italics or bold, you really want to be careful to always make sure to get all of the field code and its curly braces selected before you hit that button, because then it'll work nicely. If you forget one of the curly brackets, it will also break. There it goes. Or it'll do something weird like that, which is also not helpful. Put the field code on the right-hand side. So when in doubt, strip that formatting out and start again is what I do. So you can always copy it from the template back into the notepad and then back over again once you've deleted it. But whatever you want to do is, if you're having trouble with a particular field code or condition and it's got formatting in it, you got to clear that formatting somehow. Unfortunately, we don't have a button in the template editor that does that, clear formatting. I know a lot of programs do, but the template editor is a little more basic than Word. So yeah, so you've got a constant. Let's make it bold. Why not? We'll go back and fix that again. And it says, we transmitted the request to the CRA. Great. Please confirm this authorization as soon as possible, as we cannot proceed with preparing your tax return without it. Sign into your CRA My Business account. Go to the authorized representative section. Click on Confirm Pending Authorizations. Activate the request sent from Annalise Martineau, CPA CJA. Well, if I'm a sole prop, I might be happy with that. I might not need it to feed in a name. But what if I'm creating a template for my firm that has 5 preparers in it, and I want people to be able to share that piece of information? We can go back again, and we'll do exactly what we just did, and we're going to copy that field code. But this time we're going to go to the engagement worksheet. And we're going to find the information that's inserted on the engagement worksheet. And I'm going to have to grab a few pieces of information. So I'm going to get the first name, last name, and designation. You're going to watch me do this as quickly as I can. First name. And we're going to go, get the right window, Elizabeth. Last name, I'm clicking on the bottom. Aha! Look at my formatting is a bit weird. I'm going to make sure I'm going to fix that once I get them all in. And my designation. CPA, CGA. And let me just clean that up. Yeah, so that solves that problem for me, and it looks quite nice. And now if someone else gets this template, they're going to be able to use it as well. Now we're going to get into some fun, because we're actually going to make a condition here. So this template, of course, if I remember correctly, you have 2 weeks or 14 days to confirm these business authorization requests. So that's the purpose of this template, is to tell people don't miss that date, right? So we need to have the right date in here. This webinar is being recorded on October 21st, 2025. So we need 14 days from that day. And October 25th, 2024 just isn't going to work. And you're probably wondering, where do I find that date and how do I make it happen? So first off, I was giving this some thought about how to go about this, and we're going to go back to my help topics. There is a help topic related to filing, transmission and filing. And so there are a whole bunch of hidden field codes that help you to create conditions and pull data related to filing status. And this will be covered in a different webinar in more detail. But for what we need is we need a field code that says, has the business authorization request been transmitted? And the one that comes up is one like this receipt code here. It says, this is more for e-file, but we'll scroll down because there's a full list. Current client filing has T1 e-file receipt. That means that it's been transmitted and accepted. So we have down the bottom for auth-rep-biz, there is a current client.filing has auth-rep-biz receipt. Let's take that one and use it. Oop, but I got to get all my field codes. And over I go to my notepad. And I paste it in, and I select all, and I'm going to come back over here. Now, this is not going to give me the date that it's the deadline, but it's going to give me a date of some kind. It is going to, oh, did I not transmit? Well, let's see. Oh, you know why it's going to show that? I knew I had transmitted Martin's, but I'm viewing Vanessa's. Let's go back to Martin's. So it now knows that it's transmitted, but what I'm getting on the right is I have until true to confirm this receipt. Well, I know it's transmitted, but now what I need to do is actually get a little bit more information from here. And I actually may have pulled the wrong code. What I want is to get a little bit of the receipt details. So if you use the code that is not the has the true or false piece, but the one that actually will pull data from the receipt, we can write a small condition. So the e-file receipts, whether it's auth-rep or T1 e-file, you can get confirmation numbers and messages and the transmission date and time. And that's what we're looking for. So the T1 auth-rep-biz receipt, let's go back in here. We're going to go pull that. We're going to go and do our little magic stripping of formatting, because you will thank yourself later if you take the time to do this. And we're going to go paste that in over top. So now I get this really long thing that still doesn't give me a date, right? We're not the date. Well, the date's kind of hidden in there maybe. It says 2025 10/14, which was the date that this was transmitted on the 14th of October, probably when I was preparing this webinar. What I want to do is turn this into a condition. So this is your very first condition if you've never done one before. If you look, actually there's a really handy template I want to show you before I come back to this. We've given you a little cheat sheet. If you're building templates, it's right at the top of the list under each module, I think since 2023. And this is a cheat sheet of all kinds of useful pieces of field code. And you'll notice that there are kind of two kinds of field codes in here. There's ones that have the number sign in them, and there's, chunks of code that have a number sign in them, and there's those that don't. The ones with the number sign are effectively a condition. So the field code, the start of the field code, you will open the condition with a field code that has a number sign in it, and then you will close a condition with the same field code but with a /. And then in between that, you can enter data or pull data that relates to that condition. So if you scroll down through this cheat sheet, you'll see a lot of different options to help, well, there's all your date constants as well. Remember, you don't have to go all the way to the help topic if you don't want to. We're going to come back to a little bit about dates when we get here. You've got things about names and phone numbers and how to format them. And if you show your preview on the side, you can see how it all comes together as well. So you can use this to copy and paste content in if you would like. All right, so receipt details. Here's where I was at. So whether or not we're using a current client T1 e-file receipt, we have our thing on our template. So let's go and turn that into a condition first. And I got to go back to my letter. And that's not the one. This is the one. And I'll change the sidebar and we'll go back there. So I'm going to turn this into a condition. I'm going to put my number sign in. And I'm going to say, I'm just going to write something in date in the middle so that we know that that's where the date's going to go. Then I'm going to copy that entire field code, put it after the date, and change that number sign to a slash. So now I have a condition. And if you look on the right, you can see that it says, oh, there is a receipt, therefore show the word date. Now, if I look at my preview and I change to Vanessa, if I don't have the receipt, which I know I don't with Vanessa, it's just going to leave a blank space. We're not done. This is only part of it. So now I got to get the date in there. And I'm actually going to go back to that handy dandy little T1 code template. Go back down to where we talk about transmissions. And I'm going to grab that transmission date and time. And then we'll have a little chat about formatting dates and times. Where did I find my template? There it is. And I'm actually going to pull any formatting out of that before I put it in. All right, so format date and time. So it says you have until blah, 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 what is it? October 2025, 10/14 at 9:37 to confirm this request. Well, that's not right either, right? It was transmitted at 9:37. But before I show you how to fix that with an argument, I want to actually show you the date formatting options here. So when you format something, so if I take out this end part here, I'm just going to make this really simple. If I just wanted to pull the date, we're going to go back another step here and I'll undo it in a second. If I just put date and time in there, which is the sort of default root field code, you'll see I get a very detailed, date stamp for it that isn't very letter friendly. I have this thing that runs in the back of my mind, and it's the format function is your friend. And the format function can do so much. What is the format function? Well, back to my help topics. The format function can format currency, it can format dates, it can format phone numbers, it can format postal codes. It has a lot of power for a very little piece of code. So if you're looking to change the way something looks, the first thing you want to do is use this function. So you type format, this is within the field code, and then you put parentheses around the field code chunk that you're going to format. And immediately it will default to a much more readable format. I could send this to someone. The date's still wrong, by the way, but we could send this to someone and they wouldn't be confused. The format function also has a bunch of options where you can change the way it displays. So if you use the date 2003, January 2nd, 2003, and write it in the format you want, you can change the way that a date displays. If you put it in, if you write a comma after the field code, after the root of the field code, and then you put it in parentheses. So if I go back, the best place to take a look at these, if you're curious about how they work, is back on this cheat sheet. And we go down to dates, currency, date formats, and you can see there's lots of different ways of formatting the dates. So basically, this is a filing deadline. I've taken the body of the field code, I've wrapped format around it, I've put a comma, and then I've used that January 2nd, 2003, which, wow, it's a long time ago now. And I use that to change the result of that date. So remember that when you're working on your templates. First place to go. Okay, I'm running on in time, so let's get going. The next thing I need to do is actually do that math, right? Because I need this to be 14 days after the 14th of October 2025. And again, we've got yet another function, and there's one that's called add year, month, day. And I'm going to do this really fast so we can move on to something else, but I want you to know that it exists. So it's add year, month, day, open that parentheses, wrap it around that root of the field code, and then I'm going to put a comma after that root, and I'm going to say, I don't want to add a year, and I'm going to put another comma. I'm going to put a 0 for adding no months, and I'm going to put a 14 for adding the days. And then I'm going to, once again, I'm going to close that closing item, that closing parentheses. And down the bottom, I have 14 days from the 14th of October. And you've written your first condition. And you've formatted your first date, if you're following along. All right, I'm going to prove to you that the format field is your friend one more time. We want to grab a phone number. We want to fix the bottom of this closing salutation, the closing of this email where the phone number is set by default. Again, a different preparer might have a different phone number if that's the way you work. So I copied the phone number field code and I put it in there, and suddenly it's all squashed together and doesn't look nice at all. But if I do that format function within there, it's going to clean it up and make it look pretty. And we'll grab that again, and we're going to throw it down the bottom here and save ourselves some trouble of going back to get it. And I'm also going to get Annalise's name. Oops, I hit a wrong thing. I wonder if I actually got it or not. Nope, I did not. I'm going to carefully get her name and try not to hit the wrong key while I do that. But I don't really want the designation in this case. So I'm going to take that out, and I'm going to take the bold out. And one more thing, we need to get our firm name, and we'll put it in there. And then we'll have a beautiful little template you can use. Ta-da! Now, there's a couple of last-minute items I will like to look with you. I'm going to hit save now. All right, we've got 2 things to cover in probably about 5 minutes to do it, and then we'll be good for today. All right, so one thing you'll notice, I'm just going to hide my preview for a second, but one thing you'll notice that is different about this template than some of the other ones that you'll see is that there are an awful lot of current clients within this template. So if I go and I search for all those current clients, like if I was to go along, each field code that I put in there says current client, current client, current client, current client. And there's no harm in this. I don't want to make you scared to use the full field code. However, there's a way to make your code a little bit easier to read, and that's one of the reasons I do it. I take those current clients out. But you'll also notice I wanted to make you aware that if you're looking at one of our existing templates, like our client letter, you'll see that we've actually removed most of the current client from the body of the letter, and there's a few reasons for that. And what we do is we separate out that part of the field code into its own condition so that, I'll go back to my template, so that it knows everything in between the opening and closing tag of current client will come from the current client. It sets the context for all the field codes. And I like to do this because, well, I especially like to do it because it makes the code shorter and easier to read. But there is another reason that if we start doing things that have repeating sections, so a really good example of this is our joint letter. If you get into the joint letter, you'll notice that there is a repeating section in it. It's right at the beginning where we set a a repeating section of the template that repeats for the current client and the current spouse, right? So you define a section that will be iterated over and insert the data for different people. This is going to be covered in the letter template editor. But this is one of my reasons that I like to separate out the code, because it makes it easier later if you plan to, for example, create a template that will repeat the content for both the client and the spouse, or maybe for all the clients in the file. So I have some quick tricks that I use to do that. First off, I take this to create myself an opening condition to say, I want this whole template to pertain to the current client. And whenever I create an opening condition, I always go down to the end and close that condition so that I don't have one left open and something wonky will happen. The other thing to note about conditions, in theory, you can close any condition with just a /end. And we do use those in places in our templates. I caution you from using it all the time because it can get confusing when you have a lot of end conditions in your template. You may have one too many or one too few, and you won't be able to tell because they won't be matching pairs. So I always like to stick to the full field code, although sometimes within, if there's a condition that's within a sentence like this one, I'll use end just to simplify it. But you do run that risk if you get one too many end, something breaks too soon up the client letter. And then what I do is I just do a quick replace of this prefix, and that shortens things way down. So you see now my context is getting shorter in this case. I can use this whole concept again further down the letter here, further down the template, if I wanted to do it again with the engage. And this is a useful concept as well when you start designing templates to iterate across, say, all the income statements or all the T2125s or a table. If you take out pieces of the code and then that little piece of code there where that says it's on the engagement worksheet, I can strip out these pieces and accomplish the same thing. So my biggest reason from today's lesson is to know that you're going to run into this. You're going to see field codes that don't have a full field code, that they're going to be split up into the segments based on where they are or who they belong to. So don't be afraid if you see things like this in our existing client letters. Beware that when you copy them out, you might lose some content if you don't add that current client context. Okay, so we have a beautiful template, and it's even simpler now than it was before our short break. What I want to do is one very last thing. I want to go back to these used and relevant conditions. And I'm going to show you why. So if I'm in Martin's return, I see my biz auth rep reminder. It looks beautiful. It's great. Fabulous. If I hit my F5 and I go to Vanessa's, it also looks fabulous, but it is utterly useless because we haven't sent the authorization request. So if I'm trying to make this simpler for people in my firm to understand whether this is a useful template or not, I can put, or if I want to control whether or not it appears in a print set, that's another way of looking at it, I can create a condition to determine whether it should be there. And this is your relevant condition. So I'm going to go back to my original template. And of course, because we're dealing with my auth rep biz, I'm trying to remember exactly what I'm looking for. Just a second. Oh, no, it's not even on the auth rep biz form. It's that code, that piece of code that I thought I didn't need. Do you remember when I was over here on the list of e-filing or auth rep biz code, and I picked up this has auth rep biz receipt? Well, this is a very good example of where I can use this piece of code again. So this code tests whether or not the template, whether or not the author biz has been filed. And that's really what I want to do, right? I want to throw that in the relevant field and say, only show this in the sidebar if the author biz has been filed. And then I'm going to go over here and I'm going to look at Martin. Martin still shows. Good. Let's go to Vanessa. If I look in her sidebar, I bet you it's not there. I just got to find where I am. It's not. If I closed it here, I wouldn't be able to open it. It's kind of there behind the scenes. That's because it stayed open. But you get the idea of what I'm talking about. So you can play around with these conditions to make them show or hide them from the sidebar. If I reverse that, which is one way of doing it, I can put this in the used condition and this in the true. Just let me show you what the difference is. So if you look in the sidebar here, you see author@biz reminder, and it's got those gray lines in it for Martin. And over in Vanessa's return, it's also there, but it doesn't have any lines in it, so it's not used. And that means if you decided to come in and edit your client copy, I'm actually going to go and I'd have to go all the way deep into the form selection of my client copy, but I can do that. And I wanted to add my auth.rep.biz. Where is it? Oh, interesting. It's not corresponding with the category. I might have found a bug. So if I add my auth.rep.biz reminder in here, I can set when to show it or not to show it based on the use conditions. So when it is used, show and set and select for print, all of these conditions. This is an area we often get questions around how to customize when an invoice or a template will show up. So the keys to that is setting your used and relevant conditions, or your use condition in particular, and then coming in here and decide when it should be selected for print. I think we are nearly at time. So I want to thank you all for being here today and for taking the time to take a look at template code with me. Thank you, Christian, for your help behind the scenes, and have a great day, everyone.